So you have bought yourself a DJI Air 2S, and this may be your first drone, so you're kind of wondering what parameters you should use when you are out flying to get the best out of your purchase. In this video I will go over the settings that I prefer to use before I go out on my first flight. Welcome to another video. I'm Henrik Olsen, and if you want to learn how to make better videos with your camera and drone in general, then consider subscribing to my weekly tips, tests and tutorials. When I was setting up the drone the other day for first flight, I kind of decided that I want to do a video about this, just to show you what settings that I normally enable on the DJI Fly app before I go out flying. This might not be the best settings for you, but it is a solid starting point. Let's take a closer look and let's jump into the app. And we start by pulling up the menu by hitting the three dots in the upper right corner. And the first tab here, it's basically the app is divided into some tabs that all serves different purposes. And the first tab is called Safety. And in that, you will be able to set up the obstacle avoidance and how it should behave when it meets an obstacle. And I prefer to use the bypass function instead of the drone just stops when it meets an obstacle. Disable sideways flights, of course we want to be able to do that, so we don't want to enable that. Then we need to adjust the maximum flight altitude, and where I live, 120 meters is the maximum limit. So we just keep that at this point. I like to set a max distance of around 500 meters, because I rarely fly further away than that. The return to home altitude, I don't want that at 100 meters. We want to reduce that to 30. That should provide plenty of clearance above trees and such. The problem about setting the return to home altitude too high is that if you're flying under windy conditions, the drone may never come home because it's not capable of fighting the wind. So you want to keep that lower. 30, you could do 40, but not 100. Let's just scroll down here. There's some other stuff here that's very, very interesting. Here we need to go under advanced safety settings. Here you can define what needs to happen if the drone loses the signal at some point. I prefer the default option, return to home. That's a really good option in case that the remote loses the signal to the drone. Some would prefer hover, so it's basically stay put in case that you lose the signal. The downside to the hover approach is, of course, if you can't find the drone where it's actually hovering, then when the battery depletes, the drone will auto land in the position where it's actually hovering. And that could be very unfortunate if that is over water. So my personal preference is definitely return to home. Then there is something new that was introduced with this drone, is the AirSense technology. So the definition of AirSense is when you enable a DJI Fly app, it will notify users when there's a manned aircraft in nearby airspaces. And of course we want that enabled, and it was enabled per default. In case you don't know, there's a battery info tab here. If I tap that, I'll be able to see the condition of my battery as it is right now. That's all that I touch under the safety tab. Then let's jump under the control tab. Here you can decide what type of metric that you want. Default it's set up for metric, meters, and that makes no sense to the most of us, as speeds and such are listed as meters per second and not kilometers per hour or miles per hour that we are used to seeing. I will switch it into metric kilometers, because then I can recognize the units that's being used. You probably prefer, if you're from the US or such, to flick it into imperial. But for now, I will just keep it for metric. There are two options available for the gimbal. The one that we normally use when we are out filming with a GPS-assisted drone like the DJI Air 2S would be follow mode, where the gimbal stays fixed to the horizon when the aircraft is moving. You can also experiment with flipping it into FPV mode, where the drone or the gimbal will follow the movement of the drone. And with that setting, you'll be able to do some pretty creative stuff. But for the majority of the time, I prefer to put this in follow mode. There's the upward gimbal rotation. With that setting, that will allow the gimbal to go above level. So you can film if you're flying under trees and branches or bridges. You can do a very interesting upward angle. So if I just show you what that does. So right now, you can see I can only put it up to level. But if I enable that setting, I'll be able to continue above horizon. And I do probably want to mention, if you enable that setting, there is a slight chance that you'll be able to see props in the shot. You need to be aware of that. Then there's advanced gimbal settings, and there's so much stuff in here that could easily be covered in a separate video, and I actually did that. I made a separate video about this where I go in depth with the parameters and give you my recommendations for the settings. In case you missed that video, and if it is released when you are watching this, you will be able to access it through this card or through a link in the description below. But in short, you have 4 parameters you can adjust for each of the 3 flight modes. The 2 first parameters is the pitch speed and the pitch smoothness. Those are related to the gimbal, so you can soften down the motion of the gimbal, both the speed that the gimbal moves up and down, as well as how soft it lands when you let go of the wheel here in the back. The 2 other parameters are the yaw rotation speed and the yaw smoothness, and this is related to the rotation of the drone. You probably, if you have flown drones before, seen that when you do these panning motions, they look really horrible when you play them back on your computer. And this is often because the rotation speed is simply too fast. And you can use these sets of parameters to reduce the rotation speed and also how soft it lands when you let go of the yaw stick. So that is super nice. And as said, there is a section for normal mode, there's a section for the sport mode, and there is a section for the semi-smooth mode. In that way, you can adjust the parameters individually to your flying style in the 3 different flight modes. There is a gimbal calibration option in case that you end up in a situation for some reason where your horizon is not level. This is where you could go and do a fresh recalibration of the gimbal, where you put your aircraft on a flat surface and then everything would line up very nicely. There's the bottom customization, and that is linked to this function button, what this can actually do when it's being pressed 1 or 2 times. And the default setting is that if you tap it a single time, the auxiliary light below the drone will turn on and off. If you tap it twice, the gimbal will move 90 degrees downward, and if you tap it twice again, it will move up to level. So that's very nice, especially if you dim down the gimbal motion. It's very nice that you have this option to make it go to these 2 fixed positions, either 0 degree or 90 degrees downward. If you don't prefer the default settings, there are other options available. You can use it for the switching between the follow mode and the FPV mode for the drone. You can use it as a quick access to the camera settings. You can use it to unlock the auto exposure, and you can use it as part of the hyperlapse cruise control. But I'm perfectly happy with the default settings as it is right now. I might change it along the way when I start using the drone a little bit more. But for now, we just keep it as auxiliary LED for 1 tap and recenter gimbal for 2 taps. And below the bottom customization, there is the possibility to do RC calibration in case that your sticks are behaving not like you would expect. You can recalibrate those with that option, as well as getting access to a very beginner-friendly first flight tutorial through this point. And equally more important, I had some problems switching back and forward to the smart controller and this controller. So I had to sort of repair the remote control with the aircraft a few times. And you can do that through the option in the bottom of the control tab. That's very nice to know that this one is located down here. So now to the next tab, which is where I do most changes to the aircraft. This is the camera tab. How you will set this up depends a little bit on what you prefer to do with your footage in post-production. If you're a person that just likes to go out and fly and capture some nice footage and use it directly off the SD card for some social media, you should just keep it in normal and maybe use the H.264 codec, which is the easiest one for your computer to handle. And that profile is recorded in 8-bit. But if you want to take advantage of a wider dynamic range that is capable to capture with the DJI Air 2S, you should switch it into D-Log or HLG. I don't have much experience using the HLG mode, so I will switch it into D-Log. What D-Log does, let me just show you what D-Log does. So this is what it looks like when I just use the normal 8-bit color profile. If I switch it into D-Log, you will see that the colors are getting more flat and desaturated. But that's actually not a bad thing. This is just what happens during the recording. But when you pull it into your editing software afterward, you will be able to pull out so much more information by using the 10-bit color profile. So that's definitely something that I would prefer. And because these files are huge, especially in 5.4K and 30 FPS, it defaults to H.265, which is an encoding that compresses the files even harder than with the H.264. Because of this high compression, this is also why your computer often struggles to play back H.265 compared to H.264. The anti-flicker, we just keep that in auto. The video subtitles, that's an interesting thing. That means that you will have all the camera settings that you are using recorded as subtitles below your video. You can use programs like a VLC player and enable subtitles and see the exact settings that you were using while you're flying. We just keep that one on. It just includes the information in the file, and you won't see them during playback unless you enable the option for subtitles. Then there is the histogram. That is a graphical representation of the exposure level in your image. Of course, we want that in here because that will give us a very, very nice idea about how your image is exposed. If this graph is pushed to either side, it might indicate that we have a problem with the exposure level of our footage. Sometimes when you're out flying, it's very, very hard to see if the exposure is nailed, and then you need to utilize these tools. That will make it a lot easier to get that exposure right. Next, there's the overexposure warnings. Those are typically shown as zebra stripes in top of the footage. So if I just push this exposure up here, you would see that I get zebra stripes on the screen. Those indicate the areas of the footage that are overexposed. This is also a very helpful tool to determine if your exposure is correct. So I definitely want to enable that. Even though a lot of you don't like it as a part of the playback when I'm showing these videos, that I have those in here. But they are very, very helpful. Trust me, you want that tool enabled. On my normally cameras, I also have access to peaking levels. When enabled in manual focus mode, the objects in focus will be outlined in red. The higher the peaking level, the thicker the outline. So let's just try that. So if I just go here, now you can see that it turns the area that is in focus in red. It looks like crap when you're looking at the screen and recording, but trust me, these tools are very, very helpful when you're out in the field, have a very hard time seeing the screen to make sure that everything is like it's supposed to be in focus. This is a nice addition to this app that you have access to this now. So I just put that in normal. There's the grid lines. I always prefer to have the grid that shows the rule of third, because that will allow me to nail that composition every time. You need to remember that, of course, you can do a lot of stuff in post moving around the footage, but you have a very unique opportunity with your drone to position it correctly in the air, meaning less work when you get back home. The white balance, that is right now set to auto. I'll flick that into manual. I don't like auto settings for that because I don't want the white balance to change during the flight. So I keep that at 5500. You have the possibility to use the internal storage, but of course you should use the external storage because the 8 GB of internal storage is far from enough and will only help you out in an emergency if you are on site and have forgotten your SD card. Then there's caching when recording. That's always nice in case that you want to rewatch some of your footage while the drone is turned off, because you will be able to see a lower resolution version of what you just recorded. And I normally take that, it's default, it's 2 GB. I put it up to 4 GB, so I'm sure that I have most of the stuff that I have been recording on a single flight available. In the bottom, there's the reset camera parameters, which is nice if you're getting into a situation where you have been adjusting way too much. You can just press reset camera parameters and go back and watch this video and then do it all over again. The transmission tab, there's one thing in here that I want to change. Of course, I want HD, but maybe HD is not needed. If I run into problems with the signal quality and the video feed is deteriorating, I would much rather prefer that it's smooth than it's HD. So I will put it into smooth. We keep the dual band, and there's nothing else that we can change here. The about section, that simply just states the name of the aircraft, the model, and give you easy access to check for updates for your aircraft. Let's just do a double check of anything in the camera menu related to the photo settings here. So we just go in here so we can see we have more or less the same. Things are changing a little. I can switch between the size 3.2 of the image or 16:9. I always keep the format in 3.2 because the 16:9 is basically just a cropped down version of the 3.2. The anti-flicker, I don't touch that. Histogram, overexposure warning, peaking level, and all that stuff is the same. So there's not that many changes compared to the video settings. Then you might be wondering, where are the raw photos? Where are the raw photos? Those are actually tucked away in a different place than they were previously. Now you need to go down here in the bottom right lower corner thing, and then you can select the JPEG plus RAW. So now the drone, every time that I would take a picture, will save both a JPEG that you can use directly off the SD card, or a RAW image that you can post-process in programs like Lightroom. There's a few things on the front screen here that I would like to enable. Oh, now the ADSB, manned aircraft. I can listen. There's an aircraft here somewhere. Can you hear it? That works. Oh, manned aircraft nearby. ADSB. That's very, very nice. It's very, very nice to get that warning because maybe you are not aware, but now we know. Now we get a notification in the interface. I think that is pretty sweet. What do you think about the DJI Air 2S so far? Do you like it? Let us know in the comment below. Both for photos and video, you have the option to switch between auto and manual. So right now it's set in auto, and what I can do here, I have access to change the resolution, and I would prefer to record in 5.4K 30 FPS. I want as high resolution as possible because that will give you the most options for me in post-production. There's also the possibility to change the exposure compensation value in case that you want to over or underexpose the footage. You can simply just pull the slider to the desired level. I like to underexpose this with 0.7 stop under normal light conditions. That will save most of the highlights when I'm flying around. You can switch into manual, where you get access to all the camera parameters in the exposure triangle, where you can mess around and optimizing those. So if I just press the shutter speed here, you can see that right now I can't touch it because it's actually put in auto, but if I put it in here, I can change the shutter speed up and down. And the same goes with the ISO. See, I can adjust the digital gain of the video feed. So you can mess around with these parameters when you're out flying, especially in conjunction with the ND filters that the DJI has delivered with the Air 2S. And in case you want a video that shows you how to use these ND filters, then let me know in the comments below. So this was a run-through of the DJI Fly app as I set it up before I go out flying. Do you have other tips and ideas of stuff that you use when you go out flying? Then let us know in the comment below. And are you all pumped up about the DJI Air 2S like I am? Then I compiled a playlist with all the videos that I've made around this fantastic drone that you can access through this card. I hope you liked this video. If you did, then feel free to give it a like. If you didn't like it, feel free to press the dislike button twice. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you around.